my whole life, I wanted to be a businessman. My dad ran a Caterpillar dealership, and I remember sitting when they had the Pizza Huts with lobbies. I was sitting in there, and he reached in his pocket. He and I, and he pulled out his commission check that he had gotten, and he showed it to me, and I was just overwhelmed. I don't know, it was like a couple $100 or $500, but when you're in grade school, it seemed like $1 million. And I knew at that moment that I wanted to be a businessman, and I wanted to work with my dad. And my dad always gave us a ton of responsibility early. And he just believed in us more than anybody else could believe in anybody. And so I was, in 5th grade, I would show up to school in a business suit with a briefcase. And everybody was like, "What's the matter with you?" I'm like, "I'm a businessman. And I'm always going to be a businessman." Fast forward, I started working in the Caterpillar dealership in grade school, just in and around, and then more regularly during junior high. And I was in 8th grade, and I'm not sure my voice had dropped yet, but he had me doing collection calls to his past due invoices to these really rough and grumble contractors that were not paying their bills. And he walks in one day and he says, "Hey, let's go." And I'm like, "Well, anything to get out." Like, I hated this. And so we drive an hour and a half away, and there's this huge semi with a crane on the back of it. And he goes, "I need that back in Kansas City." Remind you, I was in 8th grade. And I'm like, "Let's go. This is going to be awesome." I got a 1-minute tutorial on how to shift a semi with no clutch. And about halfway through, you had to switch this switch to go to a different set of gears. And I had just gotten my permit, and so it was just a piece of paper. And I go, "Is this legal?" He's like, "I don't know." In the meantime, shortly, a few years after that, he had gotten out of the Caterpillar business and started Bickford Senior Living. And in college, when I was in college, I was working for him. And he kind of started it when I was a freshman, sophomore. And so I was working my way through school at a gas station until the business was big enough to come back to work with my dad, because that was my dream, is always to work with my dad. And so I was a senior in college, and we had opened our first community like when I was a freshman, sophomore. And by the time I was a senior, we were starting to grow and do more developments in other places. And I was the one that would go and manage the construction projects, and do the development deals and buy the land. I was 21 years old. I couldn't even rent a car when I flew somewhere. I didn't even have a credit card. I was using his credit card. And I never thought anything of it. And I just did it, because that's all I ever wanted to be, was a businessman. And so as I graduated college, we started doing more development deals outside of the metro and started going to many other cities. And he goes, "Let's start a construction company." I'm like, "Let's do it." So we started our own construction company and started doing development deals and construction deals all over the Midwest for us and also for other people. And I was living this life that I always wanted, to working with my dad and being a businessman, and the wonderful opportunity to work with my brothers, which I can't think of any place better to be than working with your brothers. But the thing I never realized and never anticipated was the stress that I was under and how I handled that stress. First of all, I just tried handling it with a lot of highs and a lot of lows, and end up with anxiety attacks, and I just didn't want to disappoint him. I didn't want to disappoint my family. I didn't want to disappoint anybody, and you were just doing whatever it took to get them done. And so I realized that I can't ride these highs and lows just because it's exhausting. So my next strategy was, all right, I'm just going to train the emotions out of me and just be so even that I'm never up and I'm never down. And as stuff came up, my new strategy is I'm just going to shove it down and just avoid it and not deal with it or not confront it. And so I did that in everything in my life. Through my marriage, I did that. When there was conflict, I would avoid it. I would just shove it down. And it would stew right here as a knot in the top of my stomach that would never go away. And it would just finally just disappear. And I'm not sure where it went, but it would just disappear. And then I'd be okay for a little bit. But what happened is over 20 years of doing that, I became numb inside. So my only emotion I would feel is, how you doing? I'm fine. Or, man, I'm really mad. So it was either anger or it was always okay. Those are the only two emotions I allowed myself to feel. Which you can imagine strains any marriage when that's the only emotion you feel. And I find myself in a counselor's office realizing my marriage is over and there's nothing I can do to save it. And the counselor looks at me and he goes, Joe, he goes, I think it's time you do some personal work. And he goes, there's this program in town that I really want you to think about, and it tries to get you to operate from your heart. And so he's a big 6'7" guy, which I was thankful for. And I go, there's no fucking way. That sounds horrible. Sitting around with a bunch of people with problems and having to hear about it, there's no fucking way I'm going to that. I mean, so he was strong enough to be able to push back. And so realizing that there was nothing else I could do to save my relationship and my marriage, I chose to go to class. And it was over a long period of time. And I remember going in the first time and just avoiding it. Of like, I don't need this. I don't need this. But there was exercise after exercise after exercise that was sentence stemming is like drinking a glass of water. It was so freaking hard. And it was just pushing me down into my heart. And there was just no escaping it. And so we got through the first session, which was multiple days. And they're like, all right, you have a choice if you're going to go to the next session. And I'm like, man, there's more. And that was even harder. But I chose to do it. But what I noticed is, man, it was like this crack open of my heart, of where I was coming from, and I was completely vulnerable and just raw, because I was like, I don't even know what to do with these. Commercials would come on, I'd cry. I'd watch a movie, I'd be crying through the whole thing. A song on the radio, I was crying. The worst were the clips when vets come home and surprise their kids. I was a wreck. And so, leaving that program, I was just sharing some of this with my friends, and they were wanting to hear more about it because they just didn't understand it. And so I just would set up dinners with them, and we would go sit down and we'd just have conversation. And these were the most powerful conversations I've ever had in my life. They were so vulnerable. And as Lily talked about, the masks came off from both sides, and we were just relating with whatever we were going through, whether it was divorce, challenge with the kids, cancer, job situation, transition in life with jobs or kids or whatever it might be. And there was these powerful moments. And they would leave these dinners and they're like, Joe, I've never had a dinner like this in my life. And I'm like, I haven't either. This is really fun. Let's do it again. And it's just kind of started as a path. And so going through a divorce, I'm not a partier. I hate bars. I chose not to date in my divorce. And so it was a 4-year period of my divorce. And I chose never to date. And so I was like, I'll just I made a list of all my friends and the months in which I met them, just so I could rotate through and meet with them one-on-one. And it was like this clarity of, man, this just really, really, really feels good. But I don't know what to do with it. I just like doing it. And I'd call Andy after some of them. I'm like, man, this happened, and this was amazing. And he's like, bro, you're just living your purpose. And I was like, yeah, it's just fun. I really liked it. So as my divorce finished, Andy had been through Stagen. My proclaimed brother, Alan Fairbanks, who's in the room, he's our 4th brother in Bickford Senior Living, had been through Stagen, and I've never seen people more transformationally changed than those guys going through Stagen and who they are today. And so they were pushing me to go through Stagen, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to go until my divorce is done. And so it got done, and they were like, you ready? And I'm like, okay, I think I am. But from seeing Andy go through the ILP, which everything in our company came out of Andy's experience in the ILP with our caregiver manifesto and our purpose and our mission and how we organize. So a lot of the tools and stuff of Stagen were already in our business. So for me, when I was talking to Andy, I'm like, yeah, I want to go through, and I was talking to Alan too. I'm like, I just want to go through the ILP because I want to get to the ALP, because the ALP seems more like a spiritual experience. And kind of where I was at in my life, that's what I was hoping for, was to be in this spiritual experience. And so I walked in, Stagen in class, some of my classmates are here, to walk this journey with me to see it firsthand. And I had this coach, which I don't know if she's in the room, but I haven't seen her. I was looking for her earlier, Mary Ellen Myers. And I was just sharing, as we got to know each other, this journey that we were on, that I was on, and these dinners that I was having, and I was starting to date, and so we were sharing that, and I don't want to get her in trouble, but I don't know that we talked about any of the practices and tools. It was more about my drama and my personal life. But she was just held me in such great comfort and support and encouragement through that. And so we started working on my purpose work with my values and my higher purpose worksheet. And we got down to the purpose statement. And she said to me, she goes, these usually don't come to me. But she goes, how does this one sound? To stand with others in the crucible of life. And instantly, I started crying. Because that's exactly what those moments are that people go through. From my friend losing his spouse and walking up and hugging him just as he found out, and standing with him through that journey, to friends being diagnosed with cancer, to friends losing jobs. Whatever that is, I don't have the answers. I'm not an academic. I can't remember what I read most of the time. But I just want to be there with them. And whatever that journey is, I just want to stand in that moment. And so a couple meetings later, she said, well, I've been holding off asking you something. And I go, what is it? And she goes, I think I know the moment several calls in, I knew that you needed to be a coach. And you'll see a trend here going. And I said, Mary Ellen, there's no fucking way I'm going to be a coach. That sounds horrible. And so it went from denying it to Mary Ellen not letting up and bringing it up. And it was no, hell no, I don't know. What does it look like? Well, how did I go about doing that? To, all right, where do I go? And deciding that I was going to be a coach, but my biggest fear, right, was I didn't know how that played in my business. And this is what I always wanted in my life, was in my business, to be a businessman. And so I felt like at that moment, if I chose to be a coach, I was going to be pulled out of the business. And I can't imagine not working with my brothers. I can't imagine caring for seniors. I can't imagine a life outside of that. And I was driving down the highway after one of my powerful coffees, or it was a coffee at that time, and I remember the spot on the highway, and I was thinking about being a coach. I was thinking about the business, and I thought, it was just like this light went off of like, my purpose is to stand with others in the crucible of life. And here in our company in 2021, we were in ground zero for COVID as a senior living company. Our people were getting crushed from the pressure to manage through that and to show up when their life's on the line, when it started, to help make sure caregivers are there to support these people that are entrusting us with their life. And this pressure that they're under and the pressure that they're feeling is overwhelming, and they have these huge hearts that are coming into the business, and they're just getting crushed and burnt out, and they leave. And I don't blame them. It was stressful. I mean, it was life and death in a lot of moments with people. There was death all around them. And they're in these moments, and I realized if that's my purpose, and I want to be a coach, why can't I do that inside my business, our business? And so I set up a meeting with Andy, my older brother Mike, who, if Andy's the most extroverted, Mike is my most introverted, and I'm in the middle. And Alan, which is our fourth brother, and just shared my purpose of what I've kind of come to terms with about my life and where I'm at and what I think my purpose is inside the business in the best way to be of service to the business and what God intended me to be. I got 100% support. I said, I'm going to go to coaching school. I graduated Stagen. 2 weeks later, joined Adam Klein in New Ventures West. Adam got his front row seat to the crap show inside me with trying to understand methodology and academic stuff. And it was really miserable because I'm not an academic. Like I said, I can't stand anything worse than school. And so about 3/4 of the way through that, it just settled into me. And he said, trust the process. Trust the process. It has a way of working out. And as I trusted the process, it just became completely clear to me that this is what God intended for me to be. Regardless of whatever thought I wanted to be, this is where God saying to me right now, this is what you need to do. And so, like Andy said, I stepped out of everything so I can be freely to coach the people in our business, and I coach also outside of our business. But my story is a story of denying and avoiding that led to disaster. And it wasn't until I accepted the path forward, for me, in the first time in my life, I have complete alignment with my spirituality and my purpose. And I have Stagen to thank for that. So thank you for listening.